Hello, and welcome back to Wired for Change, where we look at the technology, people, and ideas reshaping our world. I'm your host, Amy Yee. Today, we have someone with us who has lived at the intersection of physical security, cybersecurity, intelligence, and community leadership. Lina Dabit has had an amazing career, and I'm really geeking out about having her here with us today. She's held amazing positions, including, and I hope I don't get this wrong, Lina, but including Field Unit Commander of the Canadian Air Carrier Protective Program, Unit Commander of the RCMP Cybercrime Investigations Team in Toronto, and also founder and chair of the Women's Plus Employee Network for the RCMP in Ontario. Lina works currently as a leadership as an executive in the private sector, and she recently gave a very inspiring talk at B-Sides Ottawa called Global Game, Global Target, which was a really powerful call to action to recognize the emerging hybrid threat landscape facing Canada with FIFA 2026 and beyond. Today, we're going to have a look at some of the points that she made during that talk. We're going to talk about her blueprint for cyber resilience and for resilience nationally. And we're going to look at what collaborative action looks like in practice, as well as what kind of a role the community can take with respect to resilience nationally. Thank you so much for joining us, Lena.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So as I said, I really am geeking out. I think that your career has been fascinating. And I think the idea of the hybrid threat landscape is really interesting and important to understand as well, because there are so many nuances. For myself, coming from a background of digital transformation, I've often thought about things in terms of, multiple dimensions, how they
Yes.
impact each other. And that's the same thing that I think that we see with the hybrid threat landscape. I wonder if we could start though by looking at your career,
Oh.
and if you could tell us a little bit about, a few experiences that have really kind of shaped how you got to sort of a point where you're combining all of these things and you're seeing how all the dots connect.
No, that's a great question. So if you look back to where I started, I mean, I joined the RCMP in 1994 when I started my training. Uh, we had, computers in the office. We didn't it wasn't really a digital. I mean, let's be honest, we had typewriters with triplicate, and if you made a mistake with that carbon paper, you were starting all over again for court. So it really has been an evolution, and trying to explain that to some of the younger officers is a challenge. That's not the world that they grew up in. But for myself, I've always been operational. At my, at the very core, it has always been about being in a role where I'm able to do something, respond, help in any way. So though I started off in uniform policing, a lot of my experience has been about building on a foundation. So even looking back to, when you're in uniform, you're doing patrols, you're talking to people, you're getting information, you're understanding what is happening in your community. And I mean, I've policed communities from, you know, uh, medium-sized cities in on Vancouver Island to, being on my own completely in a one-person, limited duration posting in the Gulf Islands.
Wow.
So you look at being able to understand and listen and hear what is going on in your community is key. And also recognizing that people wanna help at the end of the day, and I think, I've always been a glass half full person. I truly believe in the power of humanity and that everybody wants it to be better for everybody else. And, fast forward to a world that seems a lot darker, especially, as you know, you were there for my keynote talking about misinformation is sometimes it's hard for me to reconcile that wanting to help with what I see and hear online and the rhetoric and sort of that very divisiveness and that's really being fostered by anyone, nation state, anyone who's willing to exploit that to their own advantage, and that's hard sometimes.
Especially with so many things, I guess, coming at us. You mentioned misinformation and
Yes.
disinformation in your talk, and you talked about that for a while. That was actually the second episode that I did for Wired for
Oh,
Change was actually on misinformation,
I
disinformation.
love it.
But I think that the point is that there's so much kind of coming at us. There's the physical, there's the digital, there's cyber, there's
Yeah.
all these things. I'm curious as to when you were a uniformed officer and working in the community, you must have had like developed quite an instinct for threats and risk and danger? And do you think it's possible to continue to develop those instincts as, with respect to like the full, like sort of 4D world that we live in?
100%. And actually, you hit on an excellent point. And this is something I talk to a lot of, like, I do a lot of executive advisory in my current role. And this is something where I talk to people about empowering. Everyone talks about culture. Everyone talks about culture. We have a positive culture. We want to build a positive culture. But do you, at the very core, empower your people, your teams, technical or not, that if there is something that they don't feel is right, are you empowering them to come and tell someone?
Mhm.
And it doesn't even have to be something that's tangible. And I will say for myself, that sense of instinct, that gut instinct, that I call it my cavewoman brain. It goes back to your very core, and it's. I want you to think of it like your subconscious picks up on things. It'll pick up on cues. It'll pick up on something that is supposed to be there but isn't there, or something that's there that shouldn't be there. And to me, your subconscious mind has picked it up before your conscious mind is really understanding what's happening. And you need to be able to listen to that voice and trust that voice. Because for myself, that has kept me, and I will say alive, it has kept me very safe. It has saved me from harm a few times when I was in uniform, to be able to stop and listen to that voice and think, okay, my my conscious brain is looking around and I'm not seeing anything untoward, but my subconscious is saying something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. You got to listen to this. And I have listened to that. And this is something I tell people all the time. Like, let people, let people come to you and tell you when something doesn't feel right. And then you would be surprised at what people can pick up, that even sometimes, you talk about AI, to help determine if someone is a deep fake when they're applying in a role. And that's great. But there are times where the tool misses it, but it's the person that picks it up. So it's that intuition, it's patterns
It's so interesting. I'm always fascinated by people who have a really good sense of that gut instinct or that sensitivity to things and then act on it.
and act.
I'm gonna say something personal here.
Yeah,
I detect these things, but I don't always act, and I find that it's a work in progress for me to listen to those instincts sometimes. And we were just talking about this in healthcare the other day. I was interviewing the senior team of a hospital leadership, and they talked about how important it was to cultivate an environment where people felt safe, kind of coming forward
yes.
and saying when they felt like maybe something's not right, or am I doing this right, or not, kind of thing. And it's so important to cultivate that. So I guess part of it is internal, and then part of it is,
Yes.
by cultivating that environment around you as well, and making it okay for people to say when they're not feeling comfortable, when they think
No,
something's wrong.
100%. You've literally nailed it, and that's exactly what the problem is someone like you. And again, this is where I say, some people say, well, we have a positive culture, but you don't have a positive culture if somebody, you say to people, no, no, come and report and tell us, and then people go and report, and then either they end up being embarrassed, chastised, or like, this is nothing here, like, if you can't describe it, don't come tell me. That person will never report again. And that's actually worse, because what's happening is you're not even fostering an environment where people feel like something is wrong. People will only tell you once. What happens after that is up to you. So if you don't foster an environment where people can come a second, third, fourth time, then you're gonna be missing flags that could have been called out and stopped something long before it becomes an issue.
That's so true. I love that. I love what you said about, people will come to you once. Will they come to you a second, third, or fourth time?
Yeah.
Um, you, I imagine, are an amazing listener, Lena. And right now, I'm getting to the area where you set up an investigations kind of team around interviews
Yes.
and that interview kind of capability. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So no, it is honestly something I'm very, very passionate about. So I will say, being a uniform officer in British Columbia, you learn how to talk to people. And again, looking at my time in the Gulf Islands, you learn to talk to everybody. And I do, and I talk to everyone. And I mean, I think I was sharing with you last time about my kids are like, please just don't talk to random people in the elevator. Can we just go up in the elevator and not talk to
Quietly.
people just quietly? And, like, I'll literally go up with my 20-year-old and she's looking at me out of side eyeing me, thinking, don't talk, mommy. But I do, because I find it fascinating. And I will say, interviewing, like a lot of skills, is highly perishable. So if you don't practice and talk to people, you will fall out of the comfort of it. And so for me, investigative interviewing is huge, because it's not just about trying to catch someone destroy their alibi. It's not about trying to trip someone up or trick them, because that's not what it is. It is literally about finding the truth. And I think what's important that maybe a lot of people don't realize is that sometimes when you are not willing to talk, 'cause, and I am absolutely, please, just, I am not saying don't, talk when the lawyer says don't talk. But what I am saying is that when someone is able to tell you, well, no, that's actually not the way that it happened, that that's their version of events. And if that's the truth, then that's the truth, and that will come out. And I will say that this happened once in an investigation, and I was called to come in and do an interview. So I've always been a subject matter expert even before I started the team. And so, I was called out to come and assist an investigative team, and they felt like it was maybe a human trafficking scenario. And what they had was on, and again, maybe we should just go and arrest. Maybe we should, bring the person in and arrest them, and then whatever. And obviously, my recommendation is, well, if you don't, like, all you have here is very circumstantial. Why don't you bring the person, invite the person in? You still get read all your rights. You get read everything, because if you do say something, it implicates you. You have to be able to stop it and say, okay, no, we're not gonna say that. So all that to say, without delving into the little idiosyncrasies of how you do it and why you do it, because it's really complicated, and interviewing is a lot trickier to get through court than a lot of things. But what was the reason I bring this story up is, if they had taken it at face value, and said, okay, this person is a human trafficker and this is why we think that, when the person was invited in, the person was like, yeah, I'll come in and tell you. Like, I have nothing to hide. He came in, I interviewed him, and he wasn't a human trafficker. In fact, he was the opposite. His wife had been on the plane with this young woman, uh, and felt, again, we go back to instincts, felt that something wasn't right with this young girl. And when she was talking to her, because they were seated near each other on the plane, she was telling her that she was going to meet some man, and, she was traveling and whatever. His wife was concerned enough to ask her to help her find, is there someone else in Toronto that you know? And she did. She had like a relative. So when she got off the plane, she wouldn't let her leave by herself. She brought her out, and she and her boyfriend drove her to a relative's house. So again, you combine two of those things, the trusting your instinct, and honestly, kudos to her for getting involved. We live in a world sometimes where people don't want to get involved in anybody else's problems.
Yeah.
She got involved, and she literally saved this young girl from a human trafficking scenario.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah. So again, it's not, you can't take something, I don't want to say don't take it at face value, but understand everything, have the big picture, and interviewing and being able to interview, let someone provide their version of what happened.
Hmm. Amazing. Would you be able to share, one thing about investigative interviewing that might be different from other types of interviews, or like the mindset?
Yeah. So, okay. So this drives me nuts. Sometimes I watch shows. Okay. This is a pet peeve here. I'm going to
Yeah,
rant for
yeah.
a second.
Right.
And excuse me, and you're watching the interviewer,
Yeah.
and they are literally fingering your face. You're going to tell me the truth. You're going to this, you're going to that. It's so aggressive. Would you want to tell someone something if they are in your face? People want to be liked. And I don't care if you're like, there's a very, very small fraction of people that don't care, and they're missing that part of their humanness
Yeah.
or humanity. But most people want to be liked. And if you talk to someone and you're able to develop some kind of bond, some kind of rapport, then the more likely you are to get a better
Mhm.
understanding of what that person's going to tell you.
Mhm.
So this whole in your face aggressiveness, number one, you're not going to get your statement admitted, because again, you talk about those little the rules around investigative interviewing. That's going to come off as threatening, and there is, even if that person then turned around and you know confessed to a bunch of things, that anything he said or she said in that room is not going to be admissible, because you're aggressive and you're in someone's face and you're threatening.
Interesting.
And our size, we could do an interview of someone who's a lot larger, but you have to look at the dynamic of what does it look like if it was someone a lot bigger than us interviewing us.
Right.
So you have to look at
Intimidation of
all of it. And are you sitting between me and the door, for example?
Interesting.
Then that gives that psychological barrier that the person can't get out the door. So all of that has to be factored in.
Wow, interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Thank
Oh
you for
yeah.
sharing that.
We'll talk.
That
So
makes
many
a lot of
things.
sense. I like it. Thank you for that. Let's move to another aspect of your career, and I think it makes sense going from that appreciation of how someone is feeling to understanding maybe some of the unmet needs that you encountered with respect to the Women's Plus employee network and why you founded it, and maybe what you wanted to change.
No, I love that. Uh, so policing was traditionally a very male dominated environment. And for a lot of men, that's just, I mean, it's through no fault of their own. They mix outside of work. They play on the hockey team together. They do things after work. What I was trying to do was find a way for women and anyone who identifies as a woman to have a place to feel like they could mingle with superior officers and their peers in an environment that wasn't necessarily work, but that it was an environment that was relaxed in that same way. Because I will say the Old Boys Club is unfortunately alive and well. We've gotten a lot better as an organization in the RCMP. A lot of work still to be done, unfortunately. But that said, my goal was to counter that, to give women that space where they could come in and chit chat without having to go play hockey. If they want to play hockey, great. In the same way, of course, some men were like, well, I want there to be a men's network. I want to join this. And I was like, perfect, come join. We'd love this because it isn't about being a woman or women's plus. It's about a place to belong. The whole premise of it was founded on inclusion and not exclusion.
Hmm.
And that was the difference. And people just needed a place to feel that they could be comfortable and feel like they could get the mentoring help. Because unfortunately, one of the things I did observe throughout my career is if you knew people, you played hockey, you were a good, goalie, you were whatever, you almost had opportunities to go to different units because they wanted a good hockey player or you knew them outside of work.
Yeah, you just know them. You
You just know
develop
them.
that rapport.
And they
Exactly.
like you, they hang out with you, they have a beer with you. Well, for a lot of women, that's not an option. So how do we counter that? And that was what the whole premise was. So we invited, and any man who wanted to come was more than welcome to come.
That's great because that's a question I hear a lot too with
Yeah.
some of these networks. Men are like, "Well, how come I can't go?" Kind
You
of
can
thing,
go.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and honestly, I love that because
Mhm.
come out. Because if you feel like maybe you'll find a place where you feel comfortable and you feel accepted for who you are. And I want people to feel like that because unfortunately, when people feel excluded, they don't feel like they're part of a team. So you lose that morale, you lose that sense of cohesiveness that you really do need. I mean, if you think about it in any job, not just policing,
Mhm.
you spend a good chunk of your day with your work peers. So you need to have that sense of liking each other and feeling like you belong there. Otherwise, can you imagine going into work every day and feeling like you didn't belong?
That's true. Absolutely, especially now with return to office.
Yeah, exactly. You need to
I can
belong. You need to belong.
attest. It's true. That's great, and it was well received, I imagine.
Oh, it was very well received. For a lot of women, they just felt that somebody was listening and it was about their career goals. So one of the things, I'm a huge proponent of mentorship. This is
Mhm.
one of those things that I think we all should be responsible for in some way, shape, or form and give back. And so I was mentoring, and this is a lot of it, to be honest, where the idea came from, is I was mentoring women that I've never even met, but somebody knows somebody who says, well, go to Inspector Dabit because she'll help you. And, there was one woman in particular in another province. She was the incumbent. She did all the work. She had amazing examples, but uh, nobody helped her put her package together of what it's supposed to look like, how you write your competencies. So the meat and potatoes were there because it's not about elevating someone who doesn't have the skills. It's
Right.
about ensuring that someone who has the skills gets heard. And it was phenomenal to see someone who had all the skills actually get a chance to compete. And she'd missed out on, I think, 2 or 3 promotions previously to candidates that were less experienced,
Hmm.
but they had a sponsor, they had a mentor.
Yeah,
And so it was about countering that. So for a lot of women, they felt that they could have access to that.
that's great. Yeah, it's not enough to have the talent, you also have to have
No.
that opportunity.
Yes, 100%.
Can I ask, did you have a mentor yourself who inspired you? Who
Hmm.
was able to help you?
I've had a few people who were very helpful to me, but I've never had a mentor.
Mhm.
And it's something that uh, if I could go back and do again, I want to make sure that other people don't feel like that,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It
Yeah.
does, absolutely. Thank you.
No prob
Let's move on to the hybrid threat
Oh,
landscape. So that you know, okay, so not everyone. I mean, the one of the objectives of my podcast is really to connect different sectors together and to help people who are in one sector learn about another because
yeah,
everyone's trying to drive impact and help, as you said at the beginning of the
love
show,
it.
right? And so I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about what we mean by the hybrid threat landscape and maybe how that starts to come together. And if you want, you can start to talk about FIFA as well.
Yeah.
The way you explained that in the keynote was great in terms
Oh,
of
thank
it's
you.
not just this, it's also, it's complex because it's three countries and it's like
Yeah.
many, many people and it's many, many games kind of thing. And so if you could kind of define that for my audience, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I think the problem so again, remembering that I started in policing when policing was, mostly physical for the most part, really, and how threats have evolved. And one of the things, unfortunately, that I see, and it is getting better, people are starting to understand that your threat isn't going to come from one. It isn't just going to be digital, isn't just going to be physical. And so what we're seeing is this sort of like a nexus of where everything is meeting. And so if we keep thinking of things in silos, so people do think of it in silos. You have your sort of your digital, you have your, I mean, I'm going to throw national security in there because that really is an undercurrent for everything. But you also have physical threats, and you have the people threats. So with people threats, you have things like insiders. You have, and I don't mean insiders just as in malicious. I mean accidental insiders,
Mhm.
people who don't even realize that they're the threat, like you're the vector. And so, what happens when you put all those together? And the reason I use FIFA as an example, and why it was so important for me to share that at the B sides, was because when you think of it in that scale, to that scale that FIFA is going to be, for the first time we have 3 countries, first time ever. First time we have 48 countries competing. So it is an incredible number of people all converging and a whole bunch of threats converging. And I go back to what happened with each event, each large scale sporting event, whether it was FIFA, whether it was the Olympics. And with each one, you're seeing a greater and greater convergence of how these threats are working. So I'll give you an example of something that, from Paris.
Mhm.
You had misinformation and disinformation being utilized very effectively. And we live in a era, unfortunately, where even really terrible false information spreads like wildfire.
Mhm.
And you can't unring it. Like it's like ringing a bell.
And what's an example of
So
or
so one of them,
example you use?
yeah. So at Paris, one of the ones was a nation state had sent out a bulletin that looked very official. It was a CIA bulletin, and it was all about it was the highest level of threat warning people to stay away from the trains, the metros, because the trains were having we're under it was like an imminent attack on the metros. So if you're a tourist and you're there from the US, you're going to be nervous about this. So now add to that mix, they had sabotage. So they had physical sabotage. Then you also had the misinformation. So you had the disinformation campaign with the fake CIA bulletin. Now you're having it spread like wildfire because everyone's sharing it thinking it's real. And so now you've got this perfect mix, and then physical sabotage on the trains.
Mm.
So all three of those come together to make for a very difficult situation. So how do you say to people, "Oh, no, no, that was disinformation and misinformation," but then you have actual sabotage on the trains. So people stop believing. And I think if you look at, and I know you've done the episode on the podcast, but if you look at how effective misinformation, disinformation is, it doesn't even have to be anything real. It just has to sow doubt. It has to make people not feel like they can trust anyone.
Mhm.
And that really is at its very core,
Yeah,
more than anything.
that's well defined. I like the way you put that.
Yeah, and but again, like, it was used so effectively. So when you look at FIFA right now, you look at the this is the largest call out for volunteers, right? Again, 16 sites. So that is a massive amount. So all those volunteers have to be vetted. So what happens if you have someone again, inadvertently, if you have a problem with the apps? Like, this is where it converges. We have smart stadiums, we have apps, we have people have passes. And, if your pass is supposed to work for one stadium or one thing, what happens if that goes offline? How are we preparing for that?
Mhm.
Because can you go analog?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near it if we got to that point, because I think there's going to be they're expecting 5 million people in mobile, like in transit
Wow.
across the 16 sites.
Wow.
So that's an extraordinary amount of people. So what happens if you have to manually process all that?
And the order of magnitude, going back to the volunteers point, I mean, it's thousands and thousands of volunteers, right?
Yeah, I think they've had 1 million people volunteer. It was a huge number, and of course now I'm gapping out. But it was a significant number, but they only take about 10 to 15%.
Right.
So I love that they look at them like in Paris they flagged 5,000. They red carded them or they red flagged them. Again, nation state, criminal, like what was the reason? And again, we always look at when we look at cyber threats, we always look at, is it a nation state? Is it organized crime? Is it some big syndicate? What if it's just a really terrible criminal who's decided that cyber is the way he or she is gonna make money, and they've paid for some subscriptions, they've done whatever, and they go in there. The problem is you can't discount them, and they are gonna be there as well.
Mhm.
So again, when you look at that hybrid, you aren't just dealing with national security challenges, you're dealing with national security, you're dealing with organized crime groups, you're dealing with hacktivists. What better venue to shut down than impact the opening ceremony or closing ceremony or a big game to get your message across.
That's right, and it could be all of them at the same
And
time,
all
and
of
then you've
them,
gotta figure out, how to
uh,
disentangle them, for
yeah,
example, so that you could maybe guess their next move, but maybe you can't.
the likelihood is you won't. And again, you bring up an excellent point, Amy, is that if let's say it's a nation state and they do something, well, if you're an organized crime guy or even a terrible criminal, everyone's distracted dealing with this. What a great time for you to act. So they were all either piggybacking on each other,
Right, yeah.
like taking advantage because it's opportunistic at its very core. They're either piggybacking onto it or they're collaborating in advance. And it's that inability to recognize where one starts and the other one ends because you won't necessarily be able to do that.
That's right.
It's
And then that
crazy.
crosses over into the physical
Into
as
the
well,
physical.
right? So when you look at impacts too, I think you mentioned power as an example
Power
of
is,
impacts
yeah,
on supplies or food or anything like
or
that, supply
transportation.
chains, transportation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, no, no. It's and honestly, an impact to anything impacting the power grid is going to be catastrophic because it will have the potential, like it's everything. It's people coming in and out. It's your ticketing. It is your power. What happens? So, we talk about all this, but what happens if, knock on wood, I'm going to knock on wood because I'm a little superstitious. Vancouver, what happens if there's an earthquake?
Right.
So how do you throw that into the mix? But again, it just because it's unlikely to happen doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a plan for it. How do you move that many people? So you look at emergency response. How do you in a major case, crisis or emergency, how do you move that many people? And how do you move that many people safely without having stampedes? Because you see it at events globally where something happens, people panic, and you end up with people getting trampled to death, severely injured. Like, it's significant. So how do you do it in a way that allows you to do it and remove people from an area as safely as possible?
It really sounds like there could be a very good movie about
There could be
how this plays out,
there could
right?
be a lot of movies, not ones that I want to see. It's just at all.
Have you had enough of that
I've
kind of
had
thing? You're
I know.
trying to stay away from that kind of genre?
I am telling you, it's one of those things where I'm like, "Oh my goodness," like, it is going to be a lot, and I will tell you, I am probably not going to feel like I can breathe easy till it's done, because I worry about it, I worry about it in Canada, I worry what impact it's gonna have, and if you think for the host country, um it's an opportunity to shine on the world stage, but it's also for someone who wants to impact Canada in a negative way. It's it presents opportunities to embarrass, to show that Canada's not a world leader, that Canada is, not able to put on a world class event, but we can. But there's a lot riding it. There's a lot at stake here.
Mhm. And a lot that, the average person or attendee might not be thinking about, at all. And so I imagine there must be a lot of behind the scenes kind of work taking place. Are there people who are in charge of thinking about all these different scenarios and doing tabletop exercises on them, for instance?
Yeah, but even something as simple as, like I always say, the devil's in the details,
Mhm.
and you can take care of all the big things. Like you're taking care of the stadiums, you're taking care of the teams, you're taking care of power. But what about food?
Mhm.
Who's that's a lot of food because you not only have to feed all your volunteers and all your security staff and all your policing and military who's going to be on site, but you also have to feed all the athletes.
Mhm.
So how do you ensure that safety? And I mean, it sounds so James Bondish to think, what if someone slips, something in, not necessarily to kill people, but what if they just make an entire national team sick and they can't play?
Mhm.
So again, you go back to our reputations at stake, but it's also harm to the trust people have. The whole goal of something like FIFA or the Olympics is to celebrate, have some national pride, but in a way that is positive and that you can, for the love of the game, literally for the love of the game, but have that pride at the same time. It would just be so terrible if someone took advantage of that to cause harm or mar the reputation of the host countries.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, I mean, I guess knowing what you know about how all of this works, what are some of our biggest opportunities to prepare and to mitigate the risk?
So you mentioned it earlier. One of them is tabletops, but it can't just be a tabletop of, hey, all of the power, corporations are going to do a tabletop here, or, um, FIFA's staff is going to do one here. It has to be combined, and it can't be, well, we're the police and we do it this way, and we are, private sector and they do it that way. I will say I have from sitting in my previous role have recognized that private sector has been phenomenal about wanting to work with policing and public sector. That is hands down. Some of the best partners I had when I was running the cybercrime team was our private sector partners because they recognized the need to all work together. The challenge was, again, for policing or for anyone who's been at the top, well, I call all the shots. Well, you can't call all the shots here. Um, and in this particular instance, these threats are coming from everywhere. We don't have within policing, you have a very limited number of very highly trained resources. So where are those resources? Who has all those resources that are, experts in really specialist niche areas? That's private sector. So why are we not capitalizing on what our private sector partners can do to really reinforce our defenses?
Mhm.
I truly believe that is our best approach. It's about making sure that we put our best foot forward when it comes to defense.
What do you think stops us from working more closely with the private sector?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head is egos.
Okay.
And it does. Like, I mean, I'm very transparent. I
Yeah.
I am like a bull in a china shop. But it's the truth. The truth is you can't, just because you've always done something a certain way doesn't mean that it's the right thing anymore, because that means you haven't evolved. And I'm a huge believer in evolution.
Mhm.
How do you evolve? This has changed. So what are we doing to counter that? That has changed. What are we doing to counter that? You can't stay stagnant. And I will say, in this current climate where things are changing so rapidly, you can't do what you did even 2 years ago.
Mhm.
And that's the truth of it. Uh, but at the end of the day, we have so many amazing opportunities to work together.
Mhm.
We need to capitalize on that. And, but again, you go back to people have a difficulty relinquishing that sense of, well, I should be in charge. Like, at the end of the day, you just want to say to people, enough, put it all aside. Let's all work together. So when you look at when we are working together, understanding that, and I will say, policing and everything else, very, very policy driven. It's not in policy. We can't do it. And I've had people say this, not just in cyber, but whether it was air marshals or whether it was, investigative entry team. Well, you can't do that because that's not how policy is written. But what people forget is what's guiding you. And my rule has always been, for every team I've ever led, is it ethical? Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it the right thing to do? Then that's what we're going to do. And that should be the guiding principle for everything. If there's not a policy, then we will build a policy. I mean, look at AI. Did you think we were going to be here a few years ago? I don't think any of us thought that. So nobody has policy. Well, people have policy now, but nobody had policy then when we started. But again, it doesn't mean you don't do anything because we don't have policy for it. It means you adapt, you evolve, you look at everything and build as you can, recognizing that you can't stay stagnant. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge. I'm hoping that things will move forward in the right direction, because that willingness to work together in partnerships is key, especially in cyber.
It's very hard. to convince people to change a lot of the time. I
Yes.
mean, it's and then our structures reinforce the status quo,
Yes.
right? And so a lot of the time, it's about what you were saying in terms of
Yeah.
helping people to understand what's changed.
Yes.
And it's almost like an excuse, but it's a way for them to understand like why they do need to change. And often there
Yeah.
are external forces at work that do require us to adapt, and it's so important. And it's one of the things that I think about a lot for this show.
Yeah.
What are some of the other what are some of the forces that are asking us to adapt now that
You,
you see?
by forces, do you mean like what external
What
forces?
Yeah, external forces, things that are changing.
The geopolitical climate,
Yeah.
number one. So that's probably right at the top of the list.
Hmm.
Understanding what our way of life is and what do we want to hold on to?
Hmm.
What do we need to hold on to? Understanding what is changing in the world around us are, if you look at that whole power play just right across, it's globally, things are changing. So what does that look like for us? And understanding that you can't do what you've always done and putting your head in the sand is not going to solve any problems.
Hmm.
It just isn't. So that's one. The other one is, I talk about that erosion of trust in our fundamental um, institutions, like everything,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. All I'm saying is there's so much that has changed that people don't know what to believe anymore.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous. I mean, I think 53% or 54% of people now get their news from social media as opposed to what, we would call traditional news sources. Well, the problem is the algorithm is designed to feed what you already like, what you already watch, what you already believe. So the problem there is voting, for example. And again, I don't care what political party you are going to vote based on what you feel and even if you do your research, if you're doing it on social media, it's simply going to reinforce what your biases and your current belief system is. And so people are making decisions about things like that based on an algorithm,
Yeah.
really. Like that's the problem. And so when you look at what that means and people feel like they're under attack and that gets amplified by those spreading disinformation. And I go back to that whole example of, if you look at every great civilization that's fallen has fallen from within, right? So that is a lot of it, and it's not from an external force per se, where the external force came in with an army and took over a country, but everyone crumbled from within. So when I think of external forces, I don't think of them like like the military might or someone coming in with force. I think of external forces as things that erode who we are so that we are divided. And if we are divided, we're a lot easier to, I don't want to say control, but we're a lot easier to be manipulated. We're a lot easier to go down to follow a certain path regardless. And so that's where I feel people need to understand where the risks are.
Absolutely. And we can't talk about these things enough, I think,
Yeah.
really, in terms of
Yeah.
awareness and understanding, because it's so insidious. A lot of it is very subtle, it's very hidden. And if you're not aware of it, then it's just very easy to follow that path
Yeah.
of, living in the echo chamber, as you mentioned it. Um, so, um, so there's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
I think. And so we talked a lot about the things that are changing and
Yes.
continuing to change rapidly. There's no sign of any of that change
Right.
stopping. Um, any thoughts on things that aren't changing? So one example might be, people want to help,
Yeah.
right? There are still people who want to help.
There are still people
Um,
that wanna help.
Anything else that's kind of not changing that you would see as a principle, maybe, or a fundamental?
No, that's a great question. I never thought of that. What isn't changing is our need to still bolster our security and defend.
Yeah.
And I will say, you know, I saw that the Canadian military is having an increase in numbers, and I think that's great. But it's also about who is applying and who are going into the military. So you have a greater. It's not just a bunch of young men. You have women going in. You have newcomers that are going in. You have older people that are going in. So I think that's great. But people recognize that that isn't going to change. We need to do something to protect our country,
Mhm.
but we also need to understand that desire to protect your family is huge.
Yeah.
And that isn't going to change. And in fact, that one, if anything, we're becoming more entrenched in that one. Because if you look at, you want to keep your family safe, your children safe, your elderly parents safe. How do you do that? How do you do that in this day and age? So do people are people like communication?
Mm.
That is probably the underpinning of all of it. Do you talk to your family? Do you talk to your friends? Do you help keep each other safe, or are you just hunkering down in your own world and shutting the rest of the world out?
Mm. Mm. You must have had, things that you've seen when you were a uniformed officer in terms of people wanting to keep each other safe, as well.
Yeah.
Um, any stories that would help remind
Yeah.
us of that feeling of keeping each other safe?
So when I was in the Gulf Islands, I was by myself. So I spent 2.5 years completely on my own on an island policing. And it's so funny because I look at it and I look back to then, and it was tough. I mean, by the end of 2.5 years, every time that pager went off, like I still have trauma. If I hear that pager tone, I'm like, I look around thinking, oh my goodness, I have to get dressed and go somewhere on a call. Like it becomes that impactful on you. But what you also understand is you learn a lot about yourself.
Mhm.
I learned more about myself than I did about communities, but I learned so much about my community. It became my community, my people,
Mhm.
and everybody wanted to help. It wasn't it wasn't like a police or you're the police, we're not going to talk to you. It was, I would spend Thanksgiving with people's families. I would, go to children's birthday parties. If I needed help because I have no backup, the fire department would come or the ambulance would come or somebody would come. And it didn't just matter that they were the police, they were the ambulance or the fire. Anyone in the community felt like we had to take care of each other. And I will say, yes, is it a microcosm of what we could be? Yeah. And I am not saying it was utopia, but it certainly was nice to be someplace where everybody looked out for everybody else. And I love that. Like I really my time in the Gulf Islands has probably made me more of who I am today than any other experience, bar none. Not getting promoted, not running large teams. It was being completely on my own for 2.5 years and having to rely on no one but myself and the community around me.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing
Thank
that.
you.
It's
Yeah, it was.
so important.
Yeah, it is, but people now, in my role, think of the liability of putting someone on an island by themselves.
Right.
But it's although I will say, I'll tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
You can edit it after, but, so I remember filling up I had a police boat because I not only patrolled Galliano Island, I patrolled 12 smaller islands that all had, um, seasonal cottages on them. So I would go out in the police boat, and I was coming back and I was fueling up this big police boat. And this gentleman on this beautiful big ship, with his fancy shoes and his, like it was a beautiful boat. Uh, Not a ship, but like a beautiful boat. And he comes over. He was an older man. We were right on the border of the US. And he comes over and he says to me, so, dear, because he's an older man, I was like, oh, yes, hi. And he says, how many police officers do you have on this island? And I said, "Just me." And he was so mad. He put his hands on his hips and he looked at me like he was sneering and he was like, "You mean to tell me they put a little girl on this island all by herself?"
Right.
And I was just like, "What is wrong with you?" Like, yes, but meanwhile I'm thinking, "Okay, you obviously haven't seen me take care of myself. I can and be lucky that I can take care of myself." But it was that whole it was so out of the realm of his experience that he was floored that
Wow.
you would do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
But clearly you did take care of
Clearly
yourself and you
clearly
took
I
care
did.
of the
And
island.
I took care of my island. I took care of my people.
You sure did. Jeez.
Oh,
That's funny.
I know but it was funny because there was a reporter from the Times Colonist, which was the newspaper in Victoria, and same thing, I'd be at the dock, and he came over to ask a similar question, but he was more of the, "Wow, that's so cool, I didn't even know." So they actually ended up doing a full page paper article on me, in the Times Colonist out of Victoria in, like, 2001, I think,
That's very
of
cool.
and they called it The Lone Ranger. That was the title of
That's
it.
awesome.
It was so funny. And now
That's very cool. Is there a photo?
yeah, I have
Oh,
the
I'd
whole
love to see
newspaper article, yeah.
that.
But it's just funny because, I try to explain this to my kids who are like, "Tell us more stories."
You must have some good
I have
stories.
some good stories. I'll be here all day.
Um, Moving on to a blueprint for resilience. So you had a lot of ideas in your keynote actually, and one of them was about sort of being less siloed, right? Just bringing
Yes.
together more of a joint kind of unified command kind of idea. And we're seeing, I think, some of that
Yes.
movement now,
Yeah.
right? But tell us a little bit more about that and how that would work.
No, for me, silos are there is no place for silos in modern defense. There really isn't. Yes, you have to have specialties within, but it should never be so siloed that you have no idea what other people are doing and other people have no idea what you're doing. And so the reason I say that is, when you look at defense in and of itself, well, that's physical security. We're not worrying about digital, and that one's over here. Well, that's crazy because all that is all connected. So we talked about that hybrid landscape. But when you look at the blueprint, so a couple of things for me are right at the very very top of my list. Number one is when you're looking at unified command models, are you practicing them? Do you even know who's in charge? And I mean, you look at some inquests or some big post major event where something goes terribly wrong and they do an inquiry, and it takes a really long time and they
Hmm.
do a deep dive. There's a lot of instances where there's that failure of leadership and failure of command to be able to understand who's actually in charge. So number one, recognizing that yes, it can't all be a moment where everybody comes together and everybody decides, 'cause it's not going to happen. But having a unified command where you're bringing all those parts together is absolutely necessary. So it looks like, what does it look like? It looks like people working together. It works that integrated. I talked briefly about it at B-sides, but something as simple, again, back to the details, simple as comms.
Hmm.
You might have radios that are running on this channel. That radio, that entire security team may not have access not just to that radio. They might not even be able to access that channel. How are people talking to each other? So that's a simple little thing, but that's part of it.
Hmm.
So what does that look like? Who's in charge of what? Dividing up roles so that they make sense, but recognizing when you have to work together.
Hmm.
So that means putting egos aside. And even if you want to be called the, supreme commander of whatever, that is not the right thing for that moment. So what does it look like?
Hmm.
Who's in charge? When I was in the Gulf Islands, I was in charge of, I was an incident commander because that was just me. But also, if there was a fire, I knew that in a fire scenario, that would be the fire chief is in charge of that particular thing, and I would be supporting him. But it was all about being able to evolve and understand and recognize. The problem is people get very tunnel visioned, and I've seen it happen in incidents where people just get focused and like, but this is the plan. This is what we have to do. Nothing is going to go according to plan.
Hmm.
So in the midst of a crisis, it will not go according to plan. So what is your A, B, C, D, E even? And have you practiced them? And what do they look like? So one of the things I will say is in policing, which I think is so helpful, you don't just look at only the likely scenarios and that's what you practice. You literally have a backup plan for almost every scenario
Wow.
because you need to plan for that. So again, we talked about earthquakes. So what happens if, you're in Vancouver, everything's going great, you're now worried about an incident or the other way around. There's an earthquake, but now someone's taking advantage of it because it's opportunistic and now you have thefts, you have an attack, you have anything because something's going to piggyback. So, how are you planning for that? What is that going to look like? Who's going to take charge? So, when I talk about people doing exercises together, it's all about pre planning and having gone through it a few times. What does it look like? And not just at a tabletop where everyone talks through and everyone is there at the table. It's also about having, like at FIFA, everyone's going to be there pretty much most of the time. But does the team who's on at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday know that they're going to be in charge and know what to do if something happens? Because has anyone told them that they're the decision maker? Has anyone prepared them to take on that responsibility?
Hmm.
Right? Not just as just in case it happens, call me. Well, what happens if they can't call you?
Hmm.
What happens if in the midst of a crisis, comms is down and you can't call out anyone?
Hmm.
Do those people know what to do?
Hmm.
And it's all about preparing people to give them the best chance of succeeding in their mission.
Amazing. And I think it's probably hard for people to understand how, how difficult that can really be. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
there's communication in terms of you're saying the words, but then it's understanding like the meaning behind those words and having enough of a common language established so you know that, well, this means this what this actually means
What
for that other team
Yeah.
or that
Yeah.
other discipline that is out there, or what it actually means in the field,
Yeah.
for someone as well. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
And it's the ripple effect,
Yes.
right? The big picture.
Yeah.
Because again, you could execute beautifully on your mission and it's here,
Hmm.
but you're operating in a silo here. You're not understanding that what you did may have been great for your part, but now just caused
Oh
a
yeah.
domino effect all the way down. So it's being able to understand that, but you won't know that if you're doing all your tabletop exercises separately or you're doing everything in a very segregated manner. Because again, you're like, we just hit it out of the park, guys. We are, everyone's high fiving and we are rock stars.
Checked all the boxes.
Checked all the boxes, we're good. And then you get to a real life crisis and realize that because you executed in the way that you did, which was right, you now caused all these things to happen. So understanding what all that looks like together is the key.
Amazing. And so that's kind of part of the action, side of things and that execution. But how about the role of culture
Oh,
in all of this, as well? And there may be different cultures, across the board when you try to
100%.
bring everyone together, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So when we think about, resilience and what that could look like, how should we approach kind of culture or recognize the impact that culture has and move beyond it
Right. No,
or
and
deeper into it?
no, and there's 2 ways to look at it.
Mhm.
So when you talk about culture, are you meaning because we have 48 countries here, or are you talking about cybersecurity and security culture?
Both.
Both. Okay, just
Let's look at internationally, and then let's look at
yeah, internationally, it's recognizing that. So again, when you look at the impact of culture, some teams will have needs that are different than other teams. So what does that look like? What does that mean? Have you prepared for that? Because having everyone focused on a very sort of Western or North America perspective isn't right. The whole point is to celebrate 48 different countries and that we're celebrating the sport.
Mhm.
And so preparing for that, so that could mean differences in food, that could mean having places set aside for prayer, having places where teams can, be together in an environment that's safe for them, having people that understand. Are you going to put maybe there's one of the teams has very few English speakers, so you're going to put how do you manage who's doing security right around them? How do those teams know who to go to in the event of emergency? And I don't mean they're coaches or, they're part of their delegation because they would know. But what happens if it's just a few people on the team? How have we prepared to make sure that they can report, that they can focus? And again, you're looking at things like food. Food is an integral part of it. Um, and this is one that I highlight as being small detail, but one that could take you out. It took out, like when you look at Napoleon's army on the retreat, they the yes, he miscalculated Russian winter, which was devastating. But as they're retreating, the lack of supplies, lack of food, and suddenly you had an entire army in disarray and oh, I forgot the word for it, but it's not disobedience. There's a word for it
Right.
that is better than disobedience, but I'm going to stick with that. But it was in disarray.
Yeah.
And so as they're retreating because they didn't have food. And so you look at something like any large scale event, like I know just even speaking to my colleagues who were at Calgary, they're working 16-hour shifts. How is food factored into that? If you don't have plans that are in place to feed people, are those people going to really be focused on the mission, or are they focused on the fact that maybe they've been outside for 12 hours and they have no food
Mhm.
or drink?
Mhm.
And again, it's June and July.
Mhm.
So have you taken consideration, medical emergencies? Have you taken in consideration hydration? Like all of those are moving parts, but any one of those has the potential to significantly impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But now when you talk about security culture,
Yes.
this is my favorite. So many organizations talk about security culture, but they just talk about it.
Mhm.
So are you just talking about security culture or do you have a genuine culture? And this goes back to is it punitive? Do people feel like, okay, if I say something, I'm going to get in trouble and then I might lose my job. So I'm not going to say anything. And so this is where small problems or smaller problems become really big problems because no one says anything because no one wants to be that person.
Mhm.
And so fostering that culture has to be authentic. So don't just tell me you have a positive culture. Don't just tell me, you have it. Don't just checkbox. Because as much as silos drive me nuts, checkboxes is probably right up there as one of my other rants because you can't checkbox culture. Like you can't. You can do exercises, but people are going to tune out if it's not genuine. So it has to be authentic in the same way that collaboration has to be authentic.
Mhm.
So those are two sides of the same coin. So you look at collaboration, it's everywhere. It's like a buzzword,
Mhm.
collaboration, collaboration. No, if you aren't actually collaborating, if what you say and what you do are not aligned, you are not collaborating. Full stop. So what does it look like for something like FIFA or just in general? It means, are you actually collaborating, or are you restrained by that's not how we do things because it's not in policy, or that's not how we operate. This is how we operate. And it's rigid. You can't be rigid, not in this space at all. Cybersecurity has to be fluid, it has to be able to evolve, and it has to be able to be nimble.
Tell us about a time that you saw collaboration done really well. And maybe it was a situation that where it might have been otherwise challenging to collaborate, but collaboration really came through and it was impressive.
Ooh, so I will say I'm gonna give a shout out to my old team at the cybercrime team,
Yeah.
because it was phenomenal. We had a information from the UK, about some spoofers. So for the individual in the UK that got arrested, ended up getting 7 years in jail, was literally spoofing as a service. Like there was an actual YouTube video on how to do it and why you should buy
Well,
the subscription service. It was awful. The only purpose for these spoofing services is illicit. And so they identified literally one IP. I think that's how they started, just one user. They identified the user, and my team hit it out of the park, but they had to work so closely with the UK. They had to work closely with, because now these spoofers, as we moved on, impacted 16 financial institutions in Canada, just in Canada.
wow.
So 16 financial institutions, thousands of victims. So they had to work so closely with each of the banks. They had to work so closely with the investigative teams at each of the banks. They had to work closely with police detachments across the country because we identified victims coast to coast. So when you look at the way that they worked together, I mean, there was one amazing investigator in Alberta who she thought this was her chance to help, and she dove in. She did a phenomenal job, and she was a uniformed officer. So she wasn't even in a fraud section, but she just hit it out of the park. But you look at that willingness of my team to work with her, to truly collaborate, to work with the bank investigators. It was really a testament to the hard work that they all did. Our relationships with Toronto Police, OPP, it was a true uh, example of what you can achieve when you actually all work together. And we ended up with arrests and convictions and precedent setting convictions.
Amazing.
Yeah, so really, really proud of them. I mean, it was an amazing, but again, in cyber,
Yeah.
and going back to the whole in I will say in cyber is the best cooperation I have seen in law enforcement, bar none,
Amazing.
where everybody helps everybody else without blinking.
How do you set that up for success? I mean, some of it is probably, based on the individuals that you have at the table, the right talent at the table, the people who are great at communicating and collaborating by nature, maybe they're really experienced. What else can you do to set up a team like that for collaboration kind of success?
Ooh. Well, honestly, I would say lead by example.
Mhm.
So I took over a team um, that could have used the talent a little bit better. And when I went in there, I saw just how amazing they were, but they almost needed, I don't want to say permission to be that way, but the ability to be able to work with our private sector partners, the ability to be able to talk to people outside of policing. And so, I would set up team. I was very overt in how I aggressively sought out public-private partnerships. I had developed this entire business case on why we needed to develop really good public-private partnerships because it helped us all. Because I could see how effective it was as our investigation wore on. But really what allowed them to give them the freedom to be able to do that was that I wasn't constrained by, well, policy says this is what you do or this is what you do. And not that I was floating policy, but it was more about there was nothing where I took when I took it over. Cyber was still somewhat new. And so it was about giving them permission to go out there and be innovative. And so that goes back to every team I've ever run has been about, I don't care what level of service you are, I don't care how long you've been here or you've just got here. Everyone is a contributor and everyone gets a voice. So I've always been about, come to me with ideas. And if it's something that we can try, and it's again, is it legal, ethical, moral, and is it the right thing to do? Then we're going to try it, or we're going to see if we can make it work. We also have to factor cost in there too, because that can be crazy.
Yeah.
But again, if it's something that can bring value, why would you not try?
Hmm.
And so whether it was the interview team, whether it was, the air carriers, whether it was cyber, it was, we are all, we have to have buy-in. My ideas suck sometimes. So I shouldn't be the one making that decision. And it's giving people that permission to say, hey, come up with an idea. Like, and if my idea sucks, tell me, but tell me why it sucks, and then give me an idea for how we can make it work. And then what you find is people come up with amazing ideas. And I've always ended, so I do one-on-ones with everyone, every team I've ever run. And my last question is always the same. It's not, what would you, what keeps you up at night, whatever. It's always, without considering money, costs, finances, resources, if you had a magic wand, and it sounds so hokey in policing, so you have to appreciate how out there that is. But people loved it because I would say, if you had a magic wand and you could use this wand to change one thing, regardless. Because the problem is when you ask people, what would you change? They start thinking of costs and training and this and that, right? So we automatically put constraints on ourselves. But if you say it's a magic wand, you get to pick whatever you want. What would you pick? How would you change things? What would you change? And people come up with some really amazing ideas. But what's neat is without those constraints, you can actually take those ideas and foster them to maybe a way that you can make it work.
Hmm. And maybe they weren't aware that it
Yeah.
was truly
That it's,
possible to
yeah,
move in that direction.
yeah,
Those are a lot of powerful things I think that you just said, really, in terms of, first of all, being able to say that you don't know. Sometimes you
yeah.
don't know
I
as a
don't know.
leader. Sometimes your ideas suck, as you said, as a leader. I
100%.
think that's very powerful
Oh,
for,
thank
for
you.
your team. And then being able to break open the box of what's possible, I think, and freeing them, like unleashing them to
Yeah,
hear even their intentions behind
yeah.
like the idea is so powerful as
Oh,
well.
thank you.
So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Thank you
Thank you.
for that.
Thank you.
And so I guess we have this sometimes within our own teams and organizations if we're very lucky, I think. Um, let's apply that to the community now. So when we think about the role that community can play in the face of, in building resilience in
Yeah.
Canada, in filling gaps, they may not have a single leader, for
Yeah.
example. What are some of the things that the community can be aware of and help with?
So there's a couple of ways that can go. So number one is taking care of each other. If you have an elderly neighbor, you have, someone in your community, elderly relative, um, it certainly doesn't hurt to just talk to them, especially if you have any level of expertise or awareness around cybersecurity, because there may not be anyone in their life that will talk to them about it,
Mhm.
right? There's unfortunately, especially since the after effects of isolation for a lot of people, that might be their norm. And so take that on because to me that's a huge one. The other one is there is so many there are so many amazing people in this community, in cyber, in private sector, in education, in public sector. And how amazing would that be if we could all come together and use that power for good?
Mm.
Like, to me, that is where we have to go. Because again, if you have a bunch of police officers and you put them in uniform like you did after 9/11, where everybody had a uniform on and you guard, we don't live in that world anymore.
Mhm.
So how are we preparing for that threat? Where are we gonna get the bodies from for that threat? Because it's certainly not gonna be pulling people off the road from uniformed people or drug section or whatever section. They don't have the tools to do this. But where are you gonna find those? In the public sector and in education. So I would love to see a way to have almost like a militia, and I mentioned it at B-sides, and you could see people were like, "Okay, where do I sign up?" Which
Yes.
I love the idea because I think to me, and it has to be done proactively.
Mhm.
So we can't wait till the midst of a crisis and our hair's on fire and our grid is down or something crazy is happening. And then we're like, hey, anyone out there who can do cyber, come help. Because if I was a bad actor, that's when I'd be going in causing even more damage. I
100%.
know I think devious, but
No,
been
you've
been
got to
there,
be able
done
to.
that. You have
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have to.
yeah.
But but again, you don't want to fall worse. Like, you don't want to make it worse.
Mhm.
So you have to be proactive. So how do you do that? So how do you get trusted people, some level of security clearance, which I get it. It's a lot, and it's timely and it takes a long time. Like, it takes a long time. It's costly, but it's necessary.
Mhm.
And so, how do you capitalize on that? So, you look at even some trusted entities, some of the big banks, some of the telecommunications, they have amazing teams who already have some level of clearance.
Mhm.
Why can't we work with them to put that together?
Absolutely.
So, to me, that's a given. I had done some work because, again, I was really trying to build this public private partnership before I left, before I retired.
Mhm.
And, and private sector was all over it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can all work together. You can come in and, maybe my team can, go sit in the sock for 2 weeks to see what it's like. Your team can come see the challenges policing have with regards to how you can get information, the challenge of production orders. Like, it's a lot, but it's that willingness to see how the other side does something that I think is where our biggest benefit is.
Totally. Totally. I love that. And I do see people wanting to sign up for something like
Yeah,
that too. So
because there's amazing people. Can you imagine like a defense where those motivated, driven people who are passionate about what they do, when they're at the forefront, when they're the pointy end of your, figurative spear.
Mhm. Absolutely. It
y-
sounds like a really good sort of wave your magic wand kind of way to just
Yes,
like make that happen,
right.
right?
I know. I'm like, set me free and let me do this. But I mean, I still work a lot, with policing. I still work a lot with public sector, private sector. Obviously, in my role,
Mhm.
I do a lot of work with private sector, but it's all about helping build that resilience for Canada.
Mhm.
That's my passion. I mean,
I
it's
love
our
that.
country. We gotta take care of it.
Absolutely. Any last sort of in terms of a last question, just thinking about, do you have a message that you would want to share with, Canadian leaders today in the face of, sure, FIFA 2026, but then also
There's
kind of
more.
beyond, like there must be something that that I'm sure there's a lot of things
There's a
that
lot of things
everybody needs
there's
to
a lot
know,
of things I
really.
can
There's a
say.
lot.
I think it's just listen to what's happening on the ground. Pay attention to the big picture. And I get it. Everyone surrounds themselves with, advisors and people that tell you, but you need to sometimes hear it from those who are struggling on the ground. Like, what is the struggle looking like? Where are the biggest challenges? Having that ability to be able to hear and see the big picture and what that impact looks like, because all of us see it,
Yeah.
but how far is that message getting filtered? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying it is, but
Right.
unfortunately, in my experience, um, with leadership, is sometimes people tell leaders what they want to hear
Yes.
instead of what they need to hear. Whereas I've always been I don't care who you are, I'm gonna tell you exactly what you need to hear. Um, hasn't always gone that great for me, but
I love it.
you know what? Here I am, right?
Yeah.
But I can't be any other way.
Right.
And so, again, that willingness to hear what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Yes. And that's something that we have to do from within.
100%.
Thank you so much, Lena, for this time with you. It has been so much fun
Thank
and
you.
so interesting, and I did geek out, and I wanna, and I know we'll stay in touch,
Yeah.
Lena, and do continue on your mission.
Thank you.
I look forward to supporting however I can, and I'm sure a lot of other people do too.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Wired for Change today with Lina Dabit. Look her up online. There are videos. I've seen them. There's lots of amazing stuff that she's putting out there. And if you are interested in how to help, how to pay attention to conversations about change, what's happening in the world, I do invite you to join us for another show. And please do subscribe. Thanks so much and take care.